Cloud seeding. I bet you've seen that term popping up everywhere lately. On one hand, it's talked about like this futuristic miracle that could solve all our drought problems. On the other, it's at the center of some pretty wild theories. So what's the real story here? Let's get into what the science actually says about trying to make it rain on command.
I mean, the power to command the clouds, it sounds like something straight out of a comic book, right? But for decades now, scientists have been trying to make it a reality. And today, it's happening all over the world. But here's the thing, and as we're about to see, there's a huge difference between trying to make it rain and actually proving you're the one who did it. So how much of this is real science and how much is just, well, wishful thinking?
So you gotta ask, why even attempt this in the first place?
Well, this isn't about, trying to stop rain from ruining a picnic.
Weather modification is being looked at as a serious answer to some of the biggest challenges our planet is facing right now. And the goals here they're absolutely monumental. We're not just talking about a little extra water for the garden. This tech is being used to try and fight off devastating droughts, to save billions of dollars in agriculture by stopping damaging hail, to give firefighters a much-needed edge against raging wildfires, and even just to clear up fog at airports so planes can fly safely. The stakes really couldn't be any higher.
Okay, so that brings us to the proposed solution, cloud seeding. Now, on the surface, the science behind it all seems pretty straightforward. But, what looks simple in a textbook is often a whole lot messier in the real world.
And believe it or not, this idea has been around for a long, long time. The science actually goes all the way back to the 1940s. And since then, it's had a pretty wild history. I mean, from being used in warfare during Operation Popeye to try and flood enemy supply routes, to this really high-profile attempt by China to guarantee a sunny opening ceremony for the Beijing Olympics. And that all brings us to today, where literally dozens of countries have these active programs running. So, how's it supposed to work? Well, think of it like giving a cloud a little helpful nudge. First, you need the right kind of cloud, one that's full of what they call supercooled water droplets. That's just a fancy way of saying the water is below freezing, but it needs a little trigger to actually turn into ice. Then, you provide that trigger. You spray a seeding agent into the cloud, which gives those water droplets something to grab onto. As more and more droplets join the party, they form bigger ice crystals that eventually get so heavy, they just fall. And it's not just one magic ingredient they use. The most common one is silver iodide, mostly because its crystal structure is almost identical to ice, so it's a perfect little seed. But you can also use stuff like, well, table salt. It's hygroscopic, which basically means it's really thirsty, and it loves to pull water molecules toward it. And of course, there's the original method, dry ice, which is just so incredibly cold that it flash freezes everything around it. Okay, so the theory makes sense, right? And we know people are out there doing it. But this leads us to the billion-dollar question, the one that kicks off all the controversy. Does any of this actually work? So let's start with the best case scenario. The people who support this often point to a statement from the American Meteorological Society. They suggested that under very specific ideal conditions, like winter clouds moving up over a mountain range, seeding could increase precipitation by about 10%. And hey, when you're in a terrible drought, an extra 10% is a massive deal. But then, just a few years after that, you get this. A huge report from the US National Research Council basically says that after more than 50 years of research, we still don't have what they call scientifically acceptable proof that it really does anything significant. And that right there, that's the absolute heart of the whole debate. And this is exactly why there's no easy answer. The results from studies are just all over the place. You'll find one project, like in Wyoming, that suggests maybe a small positive effect. But then you'll see another major study, like one from Tel Aviv University, that found pretty much no impact at all. The biggest problem is proving you caused it. I mean, how do you know for sure that that cloud wasn't going to rain anyway? It's an incredibly tough thing to measure. But look, the debate over whether it even works is really just the first layer of this. Now we get to the really complicated stuff. Let's just pretend for a second that it does work perfectly. What are the unintended consequences of, well, playing God with the weather? This is probably the biggest ethical question of all. It gets called rain theft. Think about it. If you force a cloud to drop all its water over your farms, are you basically causing a drought for your neighbors downwind who would have gotten that rain naturally? Yeah, this whole rain theft idea is a serious concern. See, moisture doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It moves across the planet in these massive atmospheric rivers. So if one region decides to seed clouds to fill up its reservoirs, does that mean the next region over gets less? All of a sudden, a shared natural resource becomes a source of conflict, and we have no real answers for the legal or ethical mess that could create. And then you've got the direct environmental worries. That main seeding agent, silver iodide, it's technically regulated as a hazardous substance. Now, operators will tell you, and they're right, that they use incredibly tiny amounts. But the critics ask, what happens when you spray even tiny amounts over the same area for, say, 50 years? We don't really have a clue about the long-term effects. And honestly, the fact that there's an international treaty specifically banning the hostile use of weather modification, that tells you how seriously world governments take this stuff. Okay, so it is completely impossible to talk about cloud seeding without addressing the elephant in the sky, chemtrails. The documented, real practice of cloud seeding gets tangled up with this extremely popular conspiracy theory all the time. So let's just draw a really clear line between the two. And here is the fundamental difference, okay? Cloud seeding is a real, publicly acknowledged thing that governments and companies do, but its whole purpose is to interact with existing clouds. That means it has to happen inside the clouds. The pictures people point to as chemtrails are almost always just normal condensation trails, contrails from jet engines, and you see those in clear blue skies where cloud seeding wouldn't even be taking place. They are two totally separate things that just get confused a lot. And so this is kind of where the whole debate leaves us. On one side, you have a technology that holds this incredible promise of solving some of humanity's biggest problems. But on the other side, the science is still shaky, and it kicks up a whole storm of ethical and environmental questions that we just can't ignore. It leaves us with one final massive question. In our rush to solve today's problems, are we accidentally creating an even bigger one for tomorrow?